I found out at Thanksgiving dinner. His coworker was actually his secret fiancé. They had matching tattoos and she didn't even know I existed. When I said I was his wife, she threw a plate and screamed while he whispered, "You ruined everything." My in-laws told me to stay quiet for appearances. I left with a bag and no one called me. Until she emailed me and we made a plan. It happened on Thanksgiving night. The turkey was carved, the wine was flowing, and my husband, Nate, walked in late again. Everyone turned when he came through the door, flashing that fake politician's smile he always wore when he wanted to charm a room. But this time, he wasn't alone. He had a woman with him. Pretty, put together, the kind of woman who looked like she color-coordinated her entire life. He introduced her as Sophie, a coworker from the firm who didn't have family nearby. My mother-in-law's eyes darted to mine, quick and nervous. That should have been my first warning. Sophie smiled at me and said, "Oh, you're Rachel, I've heard so much about you." Her voice cracked halfway through my name. I thought it was nerves. Turns out it was shock. For the first half of dinner, I just sat there watching them, the little looks, the shared jokes, how he touched her hand under the table when he thought no one saw. But I saw. His sister saw too. She avoided my eyes. Then, during dessert, my niece pointed at the inside of Sophie's wrist and said, "You have the same tattoo as Uncle Nate." Everything went silent. She tried to laugh it off, tugging down her sleeve, but it was too late. My husband's face turned white. I looked at his wrist, and there it was. The same exact design, two interlocking waves. The tattoo he'd told me he got for us, symbolizing how we flow together. My stomach dropped. So I smiled, the kind of smile that comes right before something explodes, and said, "That's funny because Nate and I have the same one. He told me it was just for the two of us, you know, as husband and wife." Sophie froze. Then she screamed. She actually screamed. A full guttural sound like an animal cornered. She threw her plate across the table, and cranberry sauce splattered against the wall. Nate grabbed my arm and hissed, "You just ruined everything." Everything, as if I had wrecked his double life. That's when I realized something else. My in-laws weren't shocked. Not at all. My mother-in-law reached for my hand and said quietly, "Rachel, please, let's not make a scene. We have guests." Guests, like I wasn't one of them. I left that night with one duffel bag, shaking so hard I could barely drive. Nobody called, not one text, not one apology, just silence. Until 2 weeks later when she emailed me. The subject line said, "He lied to both of us." And what she wrote inside changed everything. Nate and I met 7 years ago in Portland, Oregon. I was 27, working as a nurse, and he was this charming finance guy who claimed he loved how grounded I was. I didn't see it back then, but that was the first red flag. He didn't actually want grounded. He wanted compliant. He proposed after just 9 months. Everyone said it was fast, but he made me feel like I'd finally found stability after years of dating guys who flaked or cheated. My parents adored him, especially my mom. She called him a man with direction. The first year was okay. He worked long hours but always texted that he was doing it for us. Then, slowly, his hours got longer, his trips more frequent, his excuses smoother. I'd find receipts for dinners he couldn't explain, perfume on his shirts, but he'd always find a way to twist it back on me. "You're paranoid," he'd say. "You want to ruin every good thing I try to build." After a while, I stopped asking questions. I told myself this was what marriage was: trust, patience, compromise. But really, it was silence. And silence is where people like Nate thrive. He was good at playing both sides, the devoted husband when family was around, the distant stranger when it was just us. He had this way of making me feel invisible, like my emotions were inconveniences he didn't have time for. When he started working at that new law firm, everything shifted again. New clothes, new cologne, new password on his phone. He'd get texts late at night and step outside to take the calls, whispering like I couldn't hear him from the next room. I remember one time I asked him point blank, "Are you seeing someone else?" He smiled and said, "You'd know if I was." Turns out he was right, I did know. I just didn't want to believe it. Around that time, his parents started acting weird too. His mom once told me, "Men need to feel admired, dear. Don't let work take all his attention." I didn't realize she was preparing me to accept being sidelined. Looking back, I can see how carefully it was all constructed. Nate kept me on the edge of his life, just close enough to keep me quiet, but far enough that no one outside our home really knew me. And apparently, he was doing the exact same thing to her. Because when I opened Sophie's email, I expected an angry message from the other woman. But what I got was a heartbreak I didn't think was possible, hers and mine, twisted together. She wrote, "Rachel, I had no idea. He told me his wife died 3 years ago in a car accident. He said the tattoo was to remember her." And that's when I realized Nate hadn't just cheated, he'd rewritten reality. And now Sophie wanted to meet. In person. She said she had proof of everything, and something she needed to show me before she confronted him herself. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind that smells like burnt espresso and rain. I got there early because I couldn't sit still at home. My stomach was in knots the whole drive, part anger, part dread. When Sophie walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked nothing like the woman who had screamed at Thanksgiving. Her hair was up, no makeup, eyes swollen from crying. The first thing she did was apologize. "I'm so sorry," she said, sitting down across from me. "I swear I didn't know about you. I thought I was the only one." For a minute, I just stared at her, because she didn't sound fake. She sounded broken, the same kind of broken I'd been. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photos, receipts, emails, text screenshots. Proof, everything. There was a photo of them in Seattle, smiling in front of a hotel, dated just 2 months ago, when he'd told me he was on a business trip in Chicago. There were texts where he told her, "I wish you could meet my family soon. It's time we make this real." I felt my throat close, but then she pointed to the last page. It was a copy of a lease agreement, both their names listed as tenants on a downtown apartment. He'd signed it while still living with me. Sophie looked up and said, "He was planning to move in next month." I thought he was just waiting for work to calm down. He told me he'd been widowed and needed time to heal before introducing me to anyone. My hands went numb. That's when she pulled up a picture on her phone of the tattoo. "See the waves," she said. "He told me they were a symbol of rebirth, that his wife loved the ocean and he wanted to carry her with him." His dead wife, me, the absurdity of it almost made me laugh, almost. We sat there for over an hour, piecing together timelines. It was like building a map of deception, dates, lies, trips, little details that overlapped too perfectly to be accidental. He'd been living 2 lives for almost 3 years. He spent weekdays at late meetings that were actually dinner dates with her. Weekends with me, pretending to be exhausted from work. His parents knew. Her friends knew a version of me, the late wife, whose memory they were told to respect. That was the worst part. How many people went along with it? Before we left, Sophie said something that stuck with me. "He thinks he's smarter than both of us. He thinks we'll turn on each other instead of him." And that's when something inside me clicked. I looked her in the eye and said, "Then let's make sure he's wrong." That was the moment revenge stopped being a thought and became a plan. We weren't rivals anymore. We were co-conspirators. 2 women burned by the same man. And neither of us had anything left to lose. After that cafe meeting, Sophie and I started talking almost every night. Not about love or heartbreak, but logistics, dates, evidence, details only someone inside his life would know. She had access to things I didn't, and I had stories that made her realize just how long this had been going on. It wasn't 2 women versus 1 man anymore. It was 2 detectives untangling the same web. About a week in, Sophie said something that froze me mid-call. "Rachel, you should check your bank account statements. The joint one you share with him." I logged in right then. There it was. Thousands of dollars missing in small, deliberate withdrawals. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize, always marked with vague memos like work reimbursement or client expenses. Except when Sophie sent me screenshots of her texts with him, one of them said, "The money's almost ready. We can finally get away and start clean." It hit me, he wasn't just cheating. He was funding their new life with my savings. My stomach turned so violently I had to hang up. The next day, I went to the bank. They confirmed it. The account he was funneling money to was under his mother's name. When I confronted her over the phone, she didn't even deny it. She just sighed and said, "Rachel, if you'd been more of a partner to him, none of this would have been necessary." Necessary. That word lit something dark inside me. Because that's when I realized this wasn't just Nate's deception, it was a family operation. They'd built a whole alternate version of him, and I'd been living in the background of their story, like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. That night, Sophie called again, voice shaking. He proposed to me, she whispered. It felt like my heart stopped. He what? He got down on one knee last night, she said, her voice cracking. He said he was ready to start again. He told me he wanted to get married by spring. Spring. The same month he and I had gotten married, but it didn't make sense. He knew Sophie and I had met. He knew the truth was out. Why would he double down? Unless he didn't know we'd teamed up. He thought Sophie had gone silent because she believed his version that I was the crazy ex who couldn't move on. And in that moment, it hit me. That could be our leverage. So I told her, play along. If he wanted to believe he still had control, fine. We'd let him think that. Because when you want to destroy a manipulator like Nate, you don't confront him head-on. You let him hang himself with the same lies he built around you. Over the next few weeks, we started collecting everything: financial records, proof of fraud, emails, even photos tying him and his family to illegal money transfers through his firm. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was criminal. We were ready to blow it all up. Until the night before we planned to expose him, when Sophie texted me something that made my blood run cold. He knows, someone told him. He's coming to your house. And 30 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. It was 11:47 p.m. when the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate taps, not panicked, not polite. I knew that sound. Nate always knocked like he was entitled to be let in. I didn't move. I just stood in the dark living room, watching the shadow of his body distort through the frosted glass. Rachel, he called out, calm and low. I know you're in there. We need to talk. I didn't answer. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Sophie. Don't open the door, I'm calling the cops. But I couldn't wait for that. I wanted him to see what I'd become, the woman who finally stopped pretending. I opened the door. He looked rough. Eyes bloodshot, tie loose, a smear of lipstick on his collar that wasn't mine. His voice had that pleading tone manipulators use when they realize they've lost control. Please, he said. I can explain everything. I laughed. Which version this time? The one where your wife's dead or the one where your fiancé doesn't exist? He rubbed his face, frustrated. You don't understand. You're blowing this out of proportion. Sophie's confused. Stop, I said. She knows everything, we both do. His face went still. Just for a second the mask slipped, and I saw it. The real Nate, cold, calculating, not sorry, just cornered. He took a step toward me. You've ruined everything I built. Do you even know what you've done? I looked him dead in the eye. Yeah, I've started something you can't control anymore. Before he could respond, blue lights flashed outside. Sophie had come through. Cops pulled up, and Nate stepped back just in time to pretend he was concerned for my safety. I didn't say a word. I just let them escort him off the property. That night, Sophie and I went full war mode. We met in my car behind an empty shopping plaza, laptops open, documents spread across the dash. We built a timeline of his fraud, fake invoices, unauthorized transfers, tax evasion through his mother's shell accounts. Every single thing tied back to his firm. Sophie said, he's been using company accounts to launder money. I can prove it. We decided on a plan, 3 stages. Expose him at work, send the files to his managing partners anonymously. Freeze his assets, contact my lawyer and lock the joint account. Public humiliation, show his family the full truth in writing. No more quiet dinners. We didn't want to just ruin him. We wanted to dismantle the illusion he'd spent years constructing. But something about that night stuck with me, the way he'd said, "You've ruined everything I built." It sounded bigger than just us. Bigger than 2 women and a broken marriage. Sophie must have felt it too, because when she looked up from her laptop, her face was pale. Rachel, she whispered, you need to see this. She turned her screen toward me. It was a list of business names linked to his mother's account, except one of them wasn't a business. It was a trust fund with my name on it. I stared at it, not understanding. What the hell is this? Sophie scrolled down, her hand shaking. It's a life insurance trust. He listed you as deceased. I just stared at the screen, my own name next to the word deceased. A chill ran down my back so hard I thought I'd be sick. Sophie whispered, he forged it, Rachel. He's been collecting the insurance payout for over a year. No, I said, my voice barely there. That's impossible, I'm alive, there'd be records. She shook her head. He used falsified documents, probably bribed someone. It's in his mother's account under your name, he didn't just cheat on you. He profited off your death. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the dashboard to stay grounded. It was like finding out my whole life was an obituary he'd already written. My hands trembled as I opened the files myself. There it was, a fake death certificate, signed, notarized, and submitted to the insurance company 2 years ago. The cause of death: automobile accident, Highway 26. The same highway he'd told Sophie I died on. Every detail matched. I couldn't breathe. Every conversation, every business trip, every weird excuse suddenly made sense. He hadn't just been living a double life. He'd been preparing for one, a life without me, funded by me. That's why his family stayed silent. That's why they told me to stay quiet for appearances. They'd helped him kill me on paper. I looked at Sophie. She was crying now, not out of pity but horror. "He's capable of anything," she said quietly. "If he's already erased you once, he might try again for real." That's when my fear turned into steel. I wasn't just some betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman who'd been erased, and now I had proof. The next morning, I called a lawyer, one who handled white-collar crimes. I didn't tell him everything yet, just enough to get his attention. Then I made copies of everything, printed, encrypted, hidden in 3 different places. That night, Sophie and I met again. She'd gotten deeper into his emails, found a hidden folder named Legacy. Inside were drafts of documents, plans for the trust's transfer, a fake obituary template, even a fake charity he'd planned to start in my name. He was building a legacy off my fake death. I felt sick just thinking about how long he'd been planning it. How many times he must have looked at me across the dinner table, already imagining me gone. But we weren't going to the police yet, not until everything was airtight. We wanted to make sure when we took him down, there'd be no loopholes, no way for him to spin it. So we rewrote the game. Sophie stayed engaged. She played the loyal fiancé, gathering more evidence while I prepped the legal trap behind the scenes. Every night, we checked in whispered updates, screenshots, encrypted drives. He had no idea we were working together. No clue that every message he sent, every wire transfer, every lie was being documented. But a week later, Sophie texted me one sentence that changed everything again. "He found out about the trust being flagged." I called her, no answer. Texted again, nothing. Then the next morning I got an email, no subject line, no message, just an attachment. A photo of Sophie's tattoo, the same interlocking waves covered in blood. And underneath it, one line typed in all caps: "She tried to ruin me too." When I saw that email, I couldn't breathe. My first thought was that Sophie was dead. My second was that he'd finally decided to make it real this time, not just on paper. I called the police. They found Sophie in her apartment later that day, alive, but unconscious. Someone had broken in, trashed the place, left her bleeding but breathing. Her phone and laptop were gone. I drove straight to the hospital. When she woke up, her first words were, "He knew about the trust. He said I was part of the problem." Her voice was cracked and hoarse. The cops came in asking questions, but she didn't say his name. She just stared at me and whispered, "He's not just doing this for money." That's when she told me the part that broke something deep inside me. Nate's father had been caught years ago embezzling from the same firm Nate worked at. Quiet scandal, swept under the rug thanks to family money and connections. His father took the fall, lost everything, and died by suicide when Nate was 17. Nate never forgave that. He told Sophie that his family deserved to reclaim what was stolen. And in his mind, that meant stealing it back, from the firm, from the system, from anyone who questioned him, including me. He'd married me for one reason: access. My credit, my clean record, my good name, all the things his family had lost. I was the respectable facade he needed to rebuild his empire, and once that image was complete, I was expendable. Sophie said he'd even told her once, half-drunk, that Rachel doesn't fight for anything. That's why she's perfect, she'll disappear quietly. That's when I realized something worse than betrayal. He'd chosen me because I was easy to erase. I wasn't his partner, I was his cover story. Everything he did, the lies, the 2 lives, even the fake death, was part of a long, deliberate game. Revenge for his father's downfall, money as his weapon, women as his camouflage. And now, Sophie and I were liabilities. I spent that night in a motel, lights on, my back against the wall, trying to figure out my next move. The cops couldn't touch him yet, no direct proof linking him to the attack. The trust documents were still being verified. His firm hadn't responded to the anonymous evidence dump yet, but I knew I couldn't wait. He was going to run, or worse, finish what he started. That was when I decided it wasn't going to be about surviving anymore. It was about ending him, not just legally, not just financially, publicly. I wanted the world to see what he really was, a man who built his empire out of ashes and corpses, even the ones he made up himself. And I knew exactly how to do it. Because if Nate wanted to live off a lie, then I'd make sure that lie became the thing that destroyed him. I didn't want to be the version of me he described, passive, polite, easily erased. So I stopped being polite. First, I made him believe I was broken. I posted nothing online, I answered no calls, I let him keep thinking I was the quiet ghost he'd written into his story. But behind that silence, I unleashed everything we'd collected. I fed the firm's managing partners a packet so thorough they couldn't ignore it. Bank records, forged trust documents, emails showing him coaching witnesses, and screenshots of transfers to his mother's accounts. I made sure the sources were anonymous but undeniable. Receipts that traced back to company client accounts, PDFs with metadata tying the files to computers at his office. I watched from the shadows as the partners' faces went from confusion to fury. They froze him out immediately. HR put a temporary hold on his account. Security pulled his badge the next morning. Next, I hit the financial arteries. My lawyer, the white-collar guy I'd hired, moved faster than I knew was legal. He petitioned the court with the proof of fraud and the forged death certificate. The judge, once shown the notarized fake documents, issued emergency freezes on accounts tied to Nate and his mother. The joint account, the trust, the shell corporations, all inaccessible. They couldn't touch a cent. I felt vindicated and sick at the same time. He'd been living off my death. Now he couldn't even afford his private lawyer. But the part I wanted most was public. I'd learned how Nate loved the performance of control. His speeches to clients, the way he smiled at charity galas, the way his mother sat immaculate at Thanksgiving and told me to play quiet for appearances. So I arranged for the truth to land where it would hurt him most, his audience. I sent the documents and a concise timeline to a few investigative reporters who'd covered corporate fraud before. I included a personal letter I wrote, short and raw. Not legalese, just memory, dates, the tattoo, Sophie's scream at my family table, the smell of cranberry sauce across the wall. The reporters called within 48 hours. The fallout was cinematic. Within a week, his firm issued a statement. Within 2, his face was in the paper with quotes about allegations and ongoing investigations. His mother fled the town, the charity he'd tried to found dissolved. Sophie, slowly recovering, sat with me in a public hearing and testified. Her presence at that podium, bare wrist visible, the matching waves, was the moment I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the parts of my life he'd pawned off for profit. He tried to spin it. He called me vengeful on recorded messages, threatened lawsuits, tried to bribe people who'd turned. But the paper trail was too clean. The partners who'd once praised his direction testified to seeing the invoices I'd sent. The judge revoked his license to practice, and the firm fired him for cause. Criminal charges followed. The trust documents were declared fraudulent. They tried to prosecute Sophie for collusion. She testified that she'd been deceived. The prosecutor's office seemed almost relieved to have such a tidy net. On the last day of the trial, he stood there, small and ridiculous, and I felt nothing dramatic, no gloating, no vindictive triumph. Just a quiet clarity that came from surviving being erased. I spoke during my victim impact statement, not with theatrics but with the truth. How his choices almost killed me twice, once legally, once emotionally. I described how silent dinners and fake receipts feel when they're your life for years. I ended by telling the court, plainly, that I wasn't the woman he'd chosen for being passive. I was the one who'd learned to move. When it was over, people called. Old friends, my parents, strangers who'd read the piece. My mother cried and said she was proud. Sophie and I didn't become best friends overnight, but the bond formed in those months, forged in paperwork and sirens, is real. She emailed me later, one line, "We did it." I replied with 2 words. "We survived." I kept the tattoo. Sometimes at night, I touch the interlocking waves and laugh into the dark because the symbol that once tied me to his lie now reminds me of how I untied myself. He lost everything he built. I kept my name, my life, my anonymity turned back into identity. I sleep better. And for anyone who wonders what the kicker is, when his mother sold their house to try to pay legal fees, the realtor found a stack of unopened sympathy cards addressed to me, dated the year he killed me on paper. I bought one, wrote my name across the front, signed it, Rachel very much alive.